The roar of the crowd was deafening, a chaotic mix of cheers, boos, and an electric anticipation that sent chills through the arena. The energy in the air wasn't just excitement, it was tension, the kind that made your heart pound before something explosive happened. Tonight wasn't just another night in the world of wrestling and combat sports. Tonight was history in the making, a collision of two titans from different worlds, each with something to prove, each refusing to back down. On one side of the ring stood Conor, a fighter known for his sharp tongue and even sharper fists, a man who had conquered the octagon and built an empire off his name. On the other side was Chris Jericho, a legend in his own right, a man who had defied the limits of professional wrestling, reinventing himself time and time again, proving that age was just a number when it came to dominance. It wasn't supposed to happen, at least not like this. No one expected these two to cross paths in such a way, let alone settle their differences under the bright lights, with millions watching around the world. Conor, known for his brash confidence and explosive power, had spent years ruling in his domain, dismantling opponents with a mix of precision and sheer force. But wrestling? That was an entirely different battlefield. And Jericho? He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a master of the mind game, a man who had faced giants, submission specialists, and high flyers, adapting and outlasting them all. He had nothing left to prove, yet here he was, standing across from a man who had publicly questioned whether he could truly fight or if he was just another entertainer playing the part. It had started with words because, of course, it did. Conor was never one to hold his tongue, and when the cameras were rolling, he made sure the world knew exactly what he thought of Jericho's legacy. "He's a showman," Conor had said with a smirk, his trademark swagger on full display. "He plays tough, but when it comes down to it, he's not built for real fights." The statement sent shockwaves through the wrestling world, sparking debates, Twitter feuds, and fiery responses from fans on both sides. Jericho, never one to let an insult slide, fired back in a way only he could. "You think I'm not a real fighter? Try stepping in the ring with me. You'll find out real quick that I don't need an octagon to make you regret your words." At first, no one took it seriously. It was just another war of words between two massive personalities, the kind of social media spectacle that got people talking before quietly fading into the background. But then, things escalated. Conor wasn't the type to let things go, and Jericho wasn't the type to back down. A chance encounter backstage at a major event turned into a heated confrontation, cameras catching every second as security scrambled to separate the two. The world had seen plenty of staged fights, plenty of scripted tension meant to sell tickets, but this was different. The way Conor stepped forward, the way Jericho's eyes burned with something beyond performance, it was real. That moment became the spark that set everything into motion. Promotions, networks, and fans all saw the opportunity, the potential for something bigger than just words. Contracts were drawn up, negotiations happened behind closed doors, and before anyone could fully grasp what was happening, the match was made official. Not just any match, a no rules, no excuses fight where both men could bring everything they had to the table. Wrestling purists scoffed at the idea, believing Conor would never survive outside of his element. MMA enthusiasts claimed Jericho had no chance against someone with real knockout power. And through it all, both men fed the fire, turning every interview, every social media post, every public appearance into another chapter of their brewing war. The buildup was nothing short of legendary. Press conferences turned into battlegrounds, with security constantly intervening to keep the two from tearing each other apart before the match even began. The intensity was undeniable. This wasn't just about money or publicity. It was about pride, about proving a point in front of the entire world. Jericho wasn't just defending his legacy. He was defending the sport he had dedicated his life to, showing that wrestling wasn't just theatrics, but a battlefield where only the toughest survived. Conor, on the other hand, saw this as yet another conquest, another arena to prove that his dominance wasn't limited to a single sport. And then, the night finally arrived. The energy inside the packed arena was unlike anything seen before. Fans of both men filled the seats, some chanting Conor's name, others proudly declaring their allegiance to Jericho. The lights dimmed, the entrance music hit, and the world watched as two legends walked down that ramp, ready to settle their score in the most unpredictable showdown of their careers. Every second leading up to that opening bell felt like time had slowed, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone watching. But as the referee stepped forward, as both men locked eyes in the center of the ring, one thing became clear: this wasn't going to be a match. It was going to be a war. And by the time the first punch was thrown, there was no turning back. The moment the bell rang, Conor charged forward, his instincts taking over like a predator spotting its target. There was no hesitation, no feeling out process, just an immediate explosion of movement. He fired a quick left, the same punch that had sent so many opponents crashing to the canvas before they even realized what hit them. But Jericho wasn't just another opponent. He sidestepped at the last second, letting the punch skim past his face, and in the same motion, he drove a stiff forearm into Conor's jaw. The impact was jarring, a reminder that Jericho wasn't just here to put on a show, he was here for a fight. Conor barely took a step back before pressing forward again, but Jericho had already shifted gears. He wasn't looking to trade punches, he was looking to control the pace. With the kind of veteran awareness that only came from decades in the ring, he grabbed Conor's wrist and twisted, wrenching his arm into an awkward position. The crowd gasped as Jericho transitioned seamlessly, dragging Conor into a side headlock and grinding down, making him carry his weight. It wasn't the kind of technical hold Conor was used to, and for a split second, he hesitated just long enough for Jericho to take advantage. He wrenched harder, using his leverage to force Conor onto one knee, pressing his forearm against the side of his opponent's face. But Conor wasn't about to let himself be bullied. His competitive fire ignited, and with a sudden surge of power, he pushed off the mat, wrapping his arms around Jericho's waist. Before anyone could process what was happening, Conor lifted Jericho clean off his feet and drove him backward into the turnbuckle. The ring shook from the impact, and Jericho's grip loosened just enough for Conor to break free. He spun around, eyes locked on his opponent, and this time, when he threw that left hand, it landed flush. Jericho's head snapped back, and the crowd erupted. For a moment, it looked like Conor had turned the tide. He pressed his advantage, hammering Jericho with rapid punches, forcing the veteran to cover up. But just as it seemed like he had full control, Jericho did something unexpected. He smiled. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but there was no fear in his eyes, no sign of defeat. If anything, he looked amused. And then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, he grabbed Conor's arm, twisted his body, and flipped him over onto the mat. The shift was sudden, a reminder that Jericho wasn't just a brawler, he was a master of technique. The impact was harsh, and for the first time, Conor found himself in unfamiliar territory. Jericho wasted no time, locking in a submission hold, twisting Conor's limbs in ways they weren't meant to bend. The MMA star gritted his teeth, straining against the pressure, trying to use his strength to break free. But this wasn't a traditional octagon fight. There were no rounds, no referees to separate them if things got too dangerous. This was survival. The crowd was in a frenzy, half chanting for Jericho to finish it, half screaming for Conor to break free. But then, just when it seemed like Conor might be trapped, something changed. He stopped struggling, stopped trying to overpower Jericho. Instead, he shifted his weight just enough to create space, then twisted his hips in a way only an elite fighter could. Within seconds, he had reversed the hold, slipping free and rolling back to his feet. The shift was so smooth, so precise, that even Jericho had to take a step back and reassess. But just as Conor prepared to launch another attack, the lights in the arena flickered. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable in the chaos, but then it happened again. A murmur rippled through the crowd as confusion spread. Even the commentators hesitated, their voices uncertain. Conor glanced toward the entrance ramp for just a second, a moment's distraction, but that was all Jericho needed. The veteran seized the opening, lunging forward and hitting a perfectly timed codebreaker, driving his knees straight into Conor's chest. The impact sent the former champion sprawling, and for the first time that night, he looked vulnerable. But before Jericho could capitalize, before he could go for the pin or another attack, the arena plunged into total darkness. The crowd's reaction was instant shouts, screams, and an overwhelming sense of anticipation. Something wasn't right. This wasn't part of the show, wasn't some dramatic lighting cue meant to enhance the moment. This was different. A few agonizing seconds passed in pitch blackness, and then, without warning, the giant screens around the arena flickered to life. Grainy, distorted footage played, a mix of static and shadowy figures moving just out of focus. A voice, low and distorted, crackled through the speakers, speaking words no one could quite make out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the lights returned. But something had changed. Jericho stood in the center of the ring, glancing around, eyes scanning for something or someone. Conor, still catching his breath, pushed himself up onto one knee, shaking off the effects of the last hit. The two locked eyes again, but this time, neither of them moved. Because standing at the top of the ramp, a silhouette just barely visible through the haze of the lights, was someone neither of them expected. And just like that, the fight they thought they were having became something much bigger. The figure at the top of the ramp remained motionless, their identity obscured by the lingering shadows. The audience murmured in confusion, the tension in the arena shifting from anticipation to unease. Conor, still catching his breath, pushed himself to his feet, his gaze fixed on the silhouette. Jericho, who had spent his entire career adapting to unexpected moments, didn't move immediately. He had seen mind games before, had been in situations where distractions were used as weapons. But this felt different. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, and the figure began walking forward. The giant screens above the ring finally cleared, revealing a face that sent a shockwave through the arena. A name that hadn't been spoken in years, a competitor long thought to be gone from the industry, someone with a history that tied them to both Conor and Jericho. The reaction from the crowd was instant gasps, cheers, and pure disbelief. The man standing at the ramp wasn't just any wrestler. He was someone who had been forced out under controversial circumstances, someone whose career had seemingly ended before its time. And now, here he was, staring down two of the biggest names in combat sports, his expression unreadable. Conor, always one to embrace chaos, smirked. "You lost?" he taunted, wiping the blood from his lip. Jericho, however, wasn't as amused. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a return. It was a challenge. A statement. And if there was one thing Jericho had learned over the years, it was that the past never stayed buried. The newcomer didn't speak. Instead, he took another step forward before breaking into a full sprint toward the ring. The reaction was instant. Conor and Jericho, despite their rivalry, instinctively turned toward the threat. But before either of them could react, the man leapt onto the apron, grabbed the top rope, and launched himself into the ring with breathtaking agility. The next moments were pure chaos. Conor moved first, throwing a vicious left hand, but the newcomer ducked effortlessly, spinning behind him and delivering a brutal kick to the back of his knee. Conor dropped, stunned by the precision. Jericho tried to step in, but the man was faster, grabbing him by the wrist and whipping him hard into the corner. The crowd exploded as the newcomer turned, standing tall over both competitors, the message loud and clear: he wasn't here to watch. He was here to take over. Security rushed toward the ring, referees shouting, but the damage had already been done. Conor, shaking off the hit, looked up at the intruder with something between frustration and amusement. "You should have stayed gone," he muttered, getting back to his feet. Jericho, wiping sweat from his brow, leaned against the ropes, his expression unreadable. He had fought wars before, had faced legends and newcomers alike, but something about this moment felt different. Then, without another word, the newcomer stepped back, eyes locked onto both men, and exited the ring as swiftly as he had entered. The crowd was still buzzing, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Conor and Jericho, enemies just minutes ago, now found themselves standing on the same side of the battlefield, both staring after the man who had just disrupted everything. The night had started as a fight between two icons from different worlds, a battle for pride and dominance. But now, as the cameras captured the stunned expressions of both competitors, it was clear that this was no longer just about them. Something bigger had just begun, and neither of them had any idea what was coming next.